Welcome back. And in this Photopea project, we're going to go over how to create a background for a 2D scrolling game. Now, we're not going to get into the details of all the pixels with this and getting into like drawing grass and all the other things. We're really just going to be laying out in a 2000 by 2000 pixel gaming background. So we'll have a sky, we'll have a horizon, we'll have our foreground, and then we're going to have an underground area and areas where we would have water and other things. So while it'll look simple, we're still just doing the basic layouts here. And a lot of you don't have an art background, so I'm not expecting you to go in and draw every little pixel here. This is really just about getting the feel for the overall layout. So I'm going to go to photopea.com and I'm going to create a new project. And we'll call this one Game Background. And the width on this is going to be 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels. The DPI is 72. And we're going to stay with a white background, just an open canvas to work with. So game background 2000 by 2000, 72 DPI, white background. I'm going to hit create. And you can see it's a very large layout. So in most 2D scrollers, you'll have your sky, clouds, something above. Then you'll have your farther away objects, like say a mountain range, which we'll put in. Then we'll have things in the foreground, or in the near ground, I mean, with trees and other things. And then we'll have our playing area, which is going to be the ground for us. And then kind of an underground area. And we'll put in some water and other things as well. So we need to put in objects for all of these areas into our layers. And so each layer is going to have an object in it that we work with. So right now we have our rulers on. I'm going to do view, make sure we have everything on here, rulers and selection, slices. This is by default, it's already ready to go. And our background layer is locked, which is fine. If you try clicking on it or doing anything to it, you're going to see there's a little lock over to the right. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to come up with my move tool selected, and I'm going to click inside my ruler at the top. And I'm going to drag down a guide. I'm going to place this guide right around 12 inches. Doesn't have to be perfect, but somewhere in that range. So that's our horizon. This is where, let's say, our mountains are going to go. And then I'm going to drag down another one right around 13. And I'm going to put another one right around 20. These will help me, just when I'm drawing, to know where to stop and where to place things. So our characters will be running right in this area here. They can go down, they can jump up, but this is just for our layout. And if you don't get all of the guides in there, that's fine. You can eyeball this as well, and you can change it. Maybe it's an underground level, and you don't have any sky or anything else, and the whole thing's going to be underground, or maybe it's underwater. So first thing we're going to do is get our sky in place. And I'm going to take my gradient tool. We're going to do a daytime sky. We can do nighttime if we wanted to. It could be solid black with stars in it, but we're going to do kind of just a blue sky to start with. And I'm going to come up after I select the gradient tool and click on the gradient editor up at the top. So gradient tool, gradient editor. And I'm going to click once on the little color palette here. The color right now is the foreground. It picks up the brown. But if you click on it, we can go and grab a blue. So this is going to be a blue sky. And we're going to go light to dark. So I want light at the top, and it'll get darker as we go down. So I'm going to pick a blue. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here on the right. I'm going to go a little darker. Not that huge of a difference. Maybe I'll go a little lighter. So we have kind of a light blue going over to a darker blue. I'll hit OK. We're going to need to create a new layer to apply our gradient. So under our layers, at the very bottom, there's a new layer next to the little trash can here. So I'll click once, and we're going to rename this Sky. By placing all of these objects in their own layer, later on we'll be able to change backgrounds, change colors, and even do parallax scrolling, because everything's going to be on its own layer and we can export each of those as individual layers. But for right now, it's a composite. Everything's going to get exported at the end together. So we have our sky. I have my gradient selected. I have my gradient created. And if you click and drag, you'll have your start point and your end point. So lightest to darkest in this case. If you hold the shift key down, it will constrain it. Or you can do at an angle. I'm going to constrain. And you can see we go from light down to a dark blue. If you don't like that, you can draw right over it. Maybe we do this instead. We go from a light background. Actually, I like that better. To kind of a dark blue. So we go from a horizon lighter to a darker solid blue. So I reversed out my start to finish, or you can go the other way. So your call. I kind of like this right here. You can see kind of this hazy right in the above the horizon to a nice solid blue. I can even bring it down a little. If you drag at an angle, you can see different ways of dropping in your gradient. So I like that. So we have our sky in place now. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to place our ground in. So the ground goes on top of the sky. So that'll block off this other blue here. And we don't need to create a new layer to do that because we're going to use an object. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. That changed our options at the top. So we have a shape, rectangle. The fill is red right now. I'm just going to go with a gray for the moment. No stroke on it because we don't need a stroke. No radius or anything else. We're really just drawing a box for us to work with. And so using my guide right here, I'm going to click, drag, and you'll notice I draw my box beyond my canvas. I don't go right to the edge here. I always like to have a little extra that I can trim off. And so now this is going to be my, really the horizons right here, and the ground and everything else below it. So I'm going to double click on the layer that was created. I'm going to call this ground. Now I want to make this more of a ground color. I just did a quick fill on gray, and we're going to be using our layer styles to do this. I could have just filled it with a brown, but I want to have more control over it. So down at the bottom with my ground selected, there's an EFF. This is my layer style. I'm going to click once, and I'm going to do a color overlay. And this opens up our layer style. So we get a red here. I can click on it, and this allows me to pick any color. I'm going to pick a brown because it's the ground, it's dirt. And I'll hit OK. And I'm going to hit OK again. So we have a layer effect on our color overlay, our sky, and our background. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place another rectangle here just to kind of define the top of the ground. So this is where maybe where the grass would go, or something else that, you know, maybe it's the top of the platform that we're working on. And the reason I'm going to do that is I just want definition between this background and our baseline is probably the best way to put this. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool again. I'll leave the fill on gray because I'm just going to use a color overlay again. I'm going to draw a rectangle right at the top here. Not that large, maybe about half of this size. And I'm going to call this base. And I'm going to come down under the EFF. I'm going to do a color overlay. In this case, let's pick a green, just to make it like the top grass they're running on. Oops. All right. So you can probably see what I'm doing here is we're piecing together all of the large color areas that we're going to be placing other things on top of later. It'll be a real simple background, and we can find other images and things like that on the internet and elsewhere to populate it, but we have a canvas, we have something to build with. So now the next thing we're going to do is I want to have some mountains back here. Now one of the things we need to talk about is this background will repeat itself. So we can't have something end right at the edge here and not start over again in the same place. And to avoid that right now, our mountains won't start off screen, but just right on screen here. And they'll go, we'll put like maybe 3 or 4 of them in here. So you can see like kind of triangles. We're going to keep this real simple on the layout. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool again. Now I can do custom shape. And I'm going to select custom shape. The fill is the same. I'm just going to go with the gray because I can use my layer effects to do more with it. We can even, in this case, we're going to put a gradient in there just to add some depth. And I'm not going to start out here off the edge. I'm going to start just inside. And I'm going to start a little bit below too because it'll get trimmed off eventually. I'm going to click. And you can see what happened. I click once and I get this triangle. Now I want you to do this just so you can see what happens. We have a shape. Now up here we had shapes. So this shape was a triangle, arrow. But we didn't select a shape yet. Now I did that on purpose just because I wanted you to see what would happen. And I want to delete a layer, something we really haven't done yet. So I'll say I made a mistake. I really didn't, and we'll eventually use this shape anyway, but I don't want that there. So over here under my layers, under shape, I can select it, come down, and hit the little trash can, delete layer. It'll go away. So now let's draw a real a triangle for our first mountain. So I have my rectangle tool, custom shape. Fill is still gray. But over here on the right, we have shape. And you can see we have a lot of different shapes to work from. And this is actually something we'll use. We can build objects and things that we need using these shapes. But we're going to go with either one of these first ones. The play button is really what this is. It's not it's a triangle, but it is the play button. So either one is fine. I'm going to stick with the first one. And to make it a little easier on you, I'm going to click up here inside of the sky once. And it'll say, create new custom shape. Let's do a width of about 300 by 300. It'll make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to hit OK. And we have our shape. Now we need to kind of move it and stretch it and make it into a mountain here. So using my move tool, I'll get all of my transform control tools on. If they're not on, it's right up here, transform controls and auto select are on. just uncheck this, check it, and you'll get the little handles. And you can see when I float with my cursor right at the edge here, you get the little half circle. I can rotate my little mountain. Now I'm going to hold the shift key down. That will constrain it. And you can see it turned it. Now I can grab one corner and scale up my mountain. And I like that. Now I'm not going to go super high up here because, I don't want my mountains to be like that big. They're in the distance. And if you double click, it will resize it. Now you'll notice it's sitting on top of my background. And I don't want that. I need it behind to make it look like it's sitting behind everything. So let's name it Mountain. And I'm going to click and drag my layer down and put it between the ground and the sky. And you'll see what just happened. And I can make this a little bit bigger. That looks good. Now you'll notice I'm not starting over here. I'm going to start just off. Now we're going to reuse this mountain a couple more times. So let's get it kind of looking like a mountain. It's just kind of a gray pyramid right now. So I'm going to come down under the EFF. And this time I'm going to do a gradient overlay. And you'll see we get the black to white gradient. So we have the blend mode, the gradient. So unlike our gradient tool where we just drew a gradient, this is applying a gradient on top of the object that we drew. So I kind of like the white, it's like, oh, I've got snow up there, but it goes down to black. So let's click on the gradient. And just like the gradient editor before, we have black to white. I'm going to select the black. And let's pick a kind of a dark brown maybe. And you can play with this. And I'll hit OK. And I can move this up a little or down, like a lot of snow or just a little bit of snow on the top. I want you to be creative, play with it. I'm going to keep this pretty simple. And I'll hit OK. And I'll hit OK again. So there's our mountain. So what I'm going to do is select the mountain. And if you right click on it or control click on your keyboard, we can duplicate the layer. So I selected the mountain, I control clicked or right clicked on your mouse, and I'm going to duplicate layer. If you can't do that, select it, you go up under layer and duplicate layer under the menu as well. So let's call this mountain 2. This was mountain copy, but just so we know the difference. And this one I'm going to move up a little. And I'm going to duplicate the next one again. And this one I'm going to scale down a little. I may make it a little taller or thinner, because not all the mountains are the same. Remember, you got to double click on it too. And then one more. So that's mountain 3. Double click. Type in, whoops. There we go. Now, what just happened here was, for whatever reason, the history was moving. So I'm actually going to delete this mountain and redo that again. I'll duplicate it. And I'm going to duplicate this one more time. Remember what I said about we don't want this to go to the edge. If we did, this would have to continue over here perfectly. And for right now, just to keep this simple, we now have our mountains. They're simple. If we want to add a little bit of depth to this, but I don't really want to this far out. This is enough definition. But if we wanted to change this, we could put a little bit of a drop shadow behind these as well. But I'm not going to do that. So I think this works well with the sky going down to the light. And we got our 4 mountains in here. See what was happening here. I'm hitting my key, the number 4, and that is changing the history. So if you're having that problem, use your number key. Don't use your keys along the top for numbers. That was my problem. And that may not happen for you, but it was happening for me here. I might move these around just a little bit. Maybe even make one a little bit bigger. Or maybe do another one and put it in front. Just to add some more depth. So there's my mountains. My character is going to be running here in the background. But I want to add a little bit more into the foreground. So we have mountains. Maybe we have some trees here. And the trees would be larger than the mountains. We wouldn't have little tiny trees back here. But we may have a few just to add some depth. But the trees would be bigger here. And then the character would be running in front of them. So let's build out some trees. And actually a tree line is probably going to be a better way to put it. We can use individual trees, but we can merge them together until we have a tree line going. And we're not going to do a ton. We'll do a few just to kind of block out the background. Now our character's running here. Then our tree line should probably, and I'm going to grab a guide, our tree line should be no taller than about right here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to grab the zoom tool just to, so it's a little bit easier to see here. We have all of our mountains. Now, if we want to just clean this up, whoops, we need to name this mountain 5. See, I'm still having that same issue. So I'm just going to create a new folder down at the bottom here. And I'm going to call this mountains. You don't have to do this. And then you can drag each of the mountains into that folder. This is a group. And now I can close that up and we don't have to see them anymore. That's totally up to you. If it's easier for you just to have everything, go for it. So we have our mountains in place. If we wanted to put in, before I do the trees, maybe I want to put in like a little sun, or maybe it's a nighttime moon. So I can grab my rectangle tool. I can go to ellipse. And I don't want to draw it off to the side here like that. It needs to be in. So maybe my sun's right here, and I'll hold the shift key down. I'll rename it sun. And I'm going to do EFF. And I'm going to do a gradient overlay on this. And for the gradient, I'm going to click on the gradient here. This time, though, before I do that, or even after, I'm going to do a radial gradient. And so for the gradient, I'm going to select the color. And both of these are going to be a yellow, because it's the sun, right? So I'm going to go lighter on the inside. Hit OK. And go darker, or a little bit darker, on the outside. You can play with this. Or even a little lighter, maybe? Ah, that looks fine. Whoops. What's happening here is I went to hit OK. I'm hitting the wrong OK. There we go. How's that? And we'll hit OK. Hit OK. And OK one more time. And there's our sun. And I can move it around using the move tool. I can even put it maybe behind. But then we'd have shadows. If I did that, I'd have to drop shadows here. You know, our sun's just up here. That's why we have darker down here at the bottom and lighter at the top. We have our sun. If we wanted to draw some clouds, I would do those actually on top of everything as separate objects. But if we really wanted to put some in, we could. You can either, depending on the style, you can use the ellipse tools to draw some clouds. And actually, we'll do one. It's a good walkthrough. So I'll select the sky. I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. This time I'm just going to fill it with white, because we're going to have white clouds. And I'm going to draw a circle, then another circle, and another one, and another one. So these four shapes make up my cloud. Now, under my layers, if you right click, you can do merge down. So I'm going to merge these four shapes into my cloud. And now I can scale it up. I can make it bigger. And what I'm going to do is, now that I've got these four shapes, I'm going to do a layer effect. I'm going to do a gradient overlay. And we're going to do same as before. I'll select the gradient. This time though, I'm going to do linear, not radial. And the gradient go from white to kind of a gray. A light gray. Hit OK. And if you want to change it, I'm going to put it around -54, somewhere that so the dark is on the bottom and the light is on the top. So that adds a little bit of depth to our cloud. You can see there's a little bit of a gray here and white on the top. You don't have to. I just wanted to show you how to do it. Now I can duplicate my cloud. I can stretch it. You know, I can even overlap them a little bit. I'll duplicate this one again. Make it a little smaller. And I'll do one more. So we have our clouds now. So we have our mountains, we have our clouds. If we want to, I can create a new folder. I'll move it down. Gotta get used to moving stuff around. We'll call it clouds. And I'll move each of my clouds into it. Once again, you don't have to do this. This is totally up to you. But you'll notice I'm leaving room. Now the thing with the sun is, if this whole thing's moving, it probably wouldn't look real because the sun would repeat itself and things like that. So the nice thing is you can turn this on or off. I'll leave it on for now just for our total layout. Now let's talk about our trees. Now our trees, I'm going to do 2 lines of trees. The first line is going to be dark. They're going to be farther away. They'll just look like little trees kind of sticking up. And this is where we're going to have a repeating with the tree. So we'll slice one tree kind of in half here and here. That way this just repeats itself as it moves along. So I'm going to go and grab, and before I do anything else, we want to make sure we're on the base layer. So we're at the very top, not somewhere below before we start drawing. I'm going to grab my custom shape. I'm going to select my play button again. I'm going to click once. This time the shape needs to be a little smaller. So let's say like 150 by 150. I'll grab my move tool. I'm going to rotate, holding the shift key. And these don't need to have bases or trunks because they're going to be far away in the background. But we're going to have some more in a minute. So you'll notice when you select, you need to click in the gray, not on one of these edges, until you get just the white arrow. If you come over, it will snap to the center. Now, this is, we'll call it tree background. So we're going to have other trees in the foreground that have more definition, but these are just the background trees. So let's do an EFF on this. And we're going to do a... I'm just going to do a color overlay on this one. And we're going to go really dark green. And then hit OK. And that's all. So there's my tree. I can drag it out here and you can kind of see. I'm going to duplicate it. And I'll drag it over a little. I'm going to change the height of it because, you know, trees are different. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to duplicate the layer. And this time, I'm going to open up and change the color overlay. I'm going to make it a darker green. I'm going to select one of my other trees. And I'm going to duplicate the layer. And I'll change the size of it. And that one's a little taller. And I'm going to select the darker one again. And I'll duplicate that layer. Here, I'm going to close up the layer effect. I'll make it a little smaller. And then I'm going to duplicate that layer again. And I'm going to duplicate this layer again. So all I'm doing is duplicating the layers, moving them, and then scaling them down. So now I want to group these together, kind of like I did with the clouds. Now I could keep doing this all the way across, or I could take this and kind of duplicate it a few more times. So I could select all of these, holding down the shift key and clicking on them, and then I could duplicate the layers, but that would give me a whole pile of layers. But by selecting all of them, so I select the first one, hold down the shift key all the way through, I can right click and I can merge the layers. But look what happened. I lost those darker ones in front. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z, or Edit, undo. And just to keep this separate, I think I'm going to have to do these all as individual. Before I do that, though, this is where having a group is important, or a folder. I'm going to select, I'll do the top one here, and I'm going to do a new folder, and we'll call this trees. Now I can drag these trees, and I can always hold the shift key down and select all of them and put them all in the trees. Oops, they got rearranged a little, but that's fine. It's not the end of the world. Now, if I select all of these, holding down the shift key and right click, I can duplicate the layers. And then don't click on anything else. If you come and click and hold down the shift key, you'll get more trees. And now I can even resize these just so they don't look the same. Whoops. Undo. If you do something like that, you can just do undo. I'll stretch these out a little. And then I can duplicate these again if I wanted to. But in this case, what I'm going to do is just put a few more little trees here and there. So I'm just selecting and I'm duplicating. It's a lot of different little layers and stuff. Because maybe maybe that's the end of the trees. Now, my only concern is this one over here. I'm not going to replicate out the tree on this side, so I need to move this tree. I'll just move it over to here. And now, because I had all of these inside that folder, I can close this folder. Now, I've got a problem here, and I did this on purpose just to kind of go over the issue here. That these are on top. Well, if they were all individual, I would have to move each of these individually. But because they're in a folder under trees, I can move all the trees down under the ground. And you'll see what happened. Now, this horizon, or this ground, the trees are behind it. Now, you can add more trees. I'm not going to. I mean, I could just keep going and going. But maybe, the trees kind of end and we end up going off into the, the horizon here. And I'm going to leave this open because I'm going to put some water right here. So that's my next thing, is I'm going to add in water. So that needs to go on top of the base. So I'm going to select the base. I'm going to grab my move tool, or my rectangle tool again, and select rectangle. And I'm going to have water go for a little ways here. So this is like a little lake. So I'm going to draw a rectangle for the water. And maybe the water goes deeper. Because it's a 2D scroller, the water's going to go right here. So I've drawn the shape. I'm going to call this water. I'm going to do my layer effect on it. I'm going to do a gradient overlay. And this will be normal, linear. And for the gradient, we need to put in some blue. So it's always going to be lighter at the top and darker at the bottom. The deeper it is, darker it gets. We want it to be blue, like a nice, there we go. We'll hit OK. I can move the middle point over a little because I did change it, and I'll hit OK. Now you'll notice we're at a kind of a weird angle here. That's because the last time we set the angle at like -50 or something. So we want to do -90 degrees. And we'll hit OK. So we now have our water in place. And this could be, and remember, we're going to zoom in here. It isn't like our character is as big as the mountains. This is an entire kind of level that we're putting together here. And he may be going down, or the character may be going down into this. So now I'm going to select my ground, and I'm going to apply a gradient overlay to it. But we got an issue, don't we? Because the color overlay is on. That's not a big deal. Let's try this. I'm going to do a pattern overlay. Now, we don't have a lot of patterns. We can load others. If we had PAT files from Photoshop, we can. What I'm going to do is I'm turning off the color overlay. And under my pattern overlay, I selected a pattern here. There's a few patterns loaded. I'm going to select the second one here. It's kind of lines. It has gray in it. You can see it there. And then I'm going to place my color overlay on top of it. Then, under the opacity of the color overlay, I'm going to bring it down to about 50%. What that does is it kind of gives us a pattern, a texture for our ground. And this gives us a real basic level. Now, starting to put all the other little pieces into place, like we can have platforms and obstacles and everything else, that we'll have to do in separate little pieces. This is just kind of an open, basic background that we can work with. Now that I have all this, I could do things like, maybe I want to put a stroke on the mountain. I can come in and put a stroke on it. Maybe make it a dark brown or something. And do that on each of them, just to add more definition all the way through. I could do that over and over and over again. I can try different things and different colors and different depths and different, just to keep adding some depth to it. Even the clouds, maybe I select a cloud. And I put a stroke on it. Now, mind you, I'm not going to do the brown, but maybe it's just a little offset color. Maybe it's not as big as the one on the mountain. You can see there, we now have a stroke on it. I can do the same with the trees. And I can just keep working through this. So this is really, and I'm going to close these folders up. It's not a lot of objects, but it's just playing with them and getting a feel and a look. We really want you to sit and kind of get the feel for this and start laying it out, even if it's just circles and squares, keeping it basic and then starting to build on top of it. That can add a lot of depth. But it's a good start for backgrounds, especially if you don't know how to draw. We can just use tools and get through it. So the last thing we need to do is I'm going to save as a PSD because we always want to save this. It will download it to your downloads folder as a game background. Then we want to export as PNG. The PNG file is, and you can see here, what we'll be bringing in to use in your game. So we'll save it and we get a background.png. But make sure you save your PSD file. That way we can always reopen this and keep working on it later. So I hope this got some ideas going for you in your head. You go, oh, I can do this, I can do that. We can change backgrounds. I can put a sky, keep everything it is and change it to nighttime and put a moon in for another level. Or maybe we get rid of the mountains and do hills. Or maybe there's no water in this level. Maybe there's multiple water. Maybe there's lava or something else. But just laying it out like this and getting the basics in allows you to then use this over and over and over again.